Welcome to the Veganuary podcast, the podcast that helps you to try a vegan diet. It's stuffed full of hints and tips for anyone who wants to eat more plants.
All of Veganuary's resources are free to you, and this podcast is free from ads too. But Veganuary is a charity, and we rely on the generosity of our supporters. So if you like what we do, we'd be so grateful if you'd consider making a donation at veganuary.com/donate.
Hello again, Wendy. Have you got a most vegan thing or least vegan thing that's happened to you this week?
You know, I caught myself doing something very vegan earlier this week, which is when I was making my grocery shopping list, I caught myself writing vegan as a qualifier in front of all of the products I was buying. So I was writing vegan mayo, vegan butter. Like, I've been vegan for 16 years. There was no chance I was going to accidentally grab dairy butter. So I didn't need that note for myself. So I was like, who am I trying to impress here? Like, who am I policing this shopping list for? Some part of my subconscious just can't stand the idea that someone would see my shopping list and think, oh, she's buying mayonnaise. So I just didn't want to write it down that way.
We'd love to hear from you if you're listening, if you've got something like a very cliche vegan thing that's happened to you, or you've had a vegan fail. We'd love to hear about it so we can talk about it on the podcast. You can email us at podcast@veganuary.com. So Wendy, Veganuary is like properly underway now. I'm just wondering, we have some exciting people getting involved in Veganuary, and I wondered if you could tell us about that.
Yeah, Veganuary is so lucky to have such an incredible lineup of celebrity supporters. Stars have really come through for us to help us get the message out there, and that list just keeps growing every single year. And this year, we have a few exciting new additions to the list. One is a brand new recipe in the Veganuary Celebrity Cookbook coming from the iconic Olivia Colman, who you know from The Crown and The Favorite and The Roses and just about everything the last couple of years. She's incredible. And we're also welcoming a few other new supporters. One is Matthew Modine, who you may know best as Papa from the hit show Stranger Things. There's Elaine Hendricks, who has been killing it on Dancing with the Stars in the US this year. We have best-selling author Jane Fallon signed on as a new supporter. UK TV presenter Kirsty Gallagher is trying vegan for Veganuary and is going to share the experience with her followers, so that's going to be really fun to watch. We have actor and performer Victoria Akinoy as a new supporter, and the hilarious and talented broadcaster, writer, and campaigner Samantha Renke, who we interview in another episode, is a new Veganuary supporter. So lots of really fun, interesting, prominent voices out there sharing the message this year. And hopefully you're already following all of them.
Yeah, it's really cool. I didn't know that someone from Dancing with the Stars was doing it. And Deborah Meaden, who's involved in Veganuary, did Strictly Come Dancing here in the UK, as did Kelly Bright. If we could have a whole roster of dancing Veganuary participants, I'm very excited about this.
I think next year we have the Veganuary dance team. We get a whole TikTok trend going.
I love
Someone
it.
Email us. Who can do this? Who can choreograph this?
Yes. Okay, brilliant. Right. I wonder if Melanie Joy does any ballroom dancing. I don't think we covered that in our interview, but let's have a listen to our interview with Melanie in any case. Dr. Melanie Joy is an award-winning psychologist and educator, and she's the author of 8 books, including the best-selling Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs and Wear Cows, Beyond Beliefs, a guide to improving relationships and communication among vegans, vegetarians and meat eaters, and How to End Injustice Everywhere. Her work has featured in major media outlets around the world, and she has received a number of awards, including the Ahimsa Award, previously given to the Dalai Lama and Nelson Mandela, for her work on global nonviolence. She has given talks and trainings in over 50 countries, and she is also the founding president of the international NGO Beyond Carnism. A Half-Hearted Death Wish is her debut novel, and you can learn more about Melanie's work at carnism.org. Welcome, Melanie. Thanks for joining us.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. I'm great. It's great to be here.
Excellent. Well, it's lovely for you to join us. We have an icebreaker question that we ask all our guests, which is, for you to tell us about your dream vegan meal.
Yeah, it's so interesting. I get asked about my favorite food all the time, and I'm always fairly stumped because I'm a foodie. I love food. So anything that is, I also love healthy food. So anything that is both healthy and kind of like decadent comfort foodie works really well for me. So, I mean, if I had to like pick one thing, which I couldn't do, but just for the sake of it now, probably a pizza with lots of green stuff on it, and some sort of a whole grain crust.
That sounds delicious.
Yeah, love a salad pizza. And we always do these interviews right before my lunchtime. So making me very hungry. So we would love to hear a little bit about your journey to plant-based eating. What was your diet when you were growing up? And then what eventually inspired you to adopt a vegan diet?
Sure. So when I was growing up, my diet was pretty like meat heavy. I'd say animal product heavy, actually. I was like at one point like the Domino's meat lovers pizza girl, right?
Much different pizza than the green things pizza.
Exactly. I was into food back then too, just different. And I mean, I would get like Domino's pizza with like extra all kinds of meat on it and extra cheese, and so I ate a lot of meat when I was younger. I grew up, I've, told this story before. I grew up with a dog, though, who I loved like a family member. And I grew up eating meat, eggs, and dairy. I didn't eat fish from a very early age. I never ate fish from, I think it was the age of 4 on. I had caught a fish on my father's fishing boat, actually. My first and last fish I ever caught. And I developed a reaction to fish or anything that smelled like fish after that, where I actually get sick to my stomach. And at one point I even threw up. So never ate any seafood after that. At the time, I did not realize what was going on with me psychologically, but I had felt, quite guilty doing that. And it was after many years that I actually could reflect back and say, oh, that's why I used to eat, kind of, I would say lots of different types of animal products, but never quote unquote seafood, or almost never seafood. So I grew up with this dog, who I loved, and I grew up eating meat, eggs, and dairy. And I just, over many years, I never thought about how strange it was that I could pet my dog with one hand, while I ate a pork chop with the other. A pork chop that had once been an animal who was at least as intelligent and sentient and conscious as my dog, right? I didn't make the connection between the meat on my plate and the living being it once was. But all of that changed in 1989. I was 23 years old at the time, and I ate a hamburger that turned out to have been contaminated with a very dangerous bacteria. And I wound up in the hospital, and I was on intravenous antibiotics, and I was like wildly, wildly sick. And after that experience, I became a vegetarian pretty much by accident because like the last thing that you eat, you're just disgusted by. So it wasn't any conscious, like ethical decision or anything to stop eating animals. I was just like, oh my God, I can never eat meat again. And so this was before the internet, right? And so I had to like learn how to cook for myself and learn how to shop for myself. And, so I was like, gathering information. And what I learned like shocked and horrified me. I eventually became vegan. It didn't take terribly long to become vegan. I could not believe the extent of harm, to animals. Like in just one day, more farmed animals are slaughtered than the total number of people killed in all wars throughout history. Those are global numbers. I mean, it's just like staggering. Harm to the environment, harm to my own body, human health, and so on. But what shocked me in some ways even more was that nobody I talked to about what I was learning was willing to hear what I had to say. And I'm talking about like my good friends, my family. There were people just like I was, right? They're rational people. They're compassionate people. They cared about animals. They loved their dogs. They would never want to contribute to harm and cruelty. And yet the response, whenever I tried to share, what felt like it was, for me, it was just so eye-opening. Whenever I tried to share this information, it would always be something like, don't tell me that, you'll ruin my meal. Or they'd call me like a radical vegan hippie propagandist. And I was just like, holy cow, like what is going on here? It was like I woke up in the midst of this collective insanity. And so that was really what led me on the journey that, basically brought me here today. I just became very curious as to how rational, caring people could just stop thinking and feeling when it came to this issue of eating animals. And I eventually did a doctoral degree in psychology. And I wrote my doctoral dissertation specifically. I studied the psychology of violence and nonviolence broadly because there was really basically no information at the time about the psychology of eating animals. But then I wrote my doctoral dissertation on the psychology of eating animals. And this was my question. Like, what is it that causes us to go through what are these mental, psychological gymnastics that we all go through to just stop thinking and feeling when it comes to the issue of eating animals? And if I could understand that, maybe I could understand how to kind of bypass these gymnastics and get through to the people who I knew really care and really would want to take much more, positive action for themselves and their world.
So all of these experiences, you kind of developed this concept of carnism, which I think is a really useful word and a useful tool for people who are vegan advocates to really think about the world. And it kind of flips your perspective a little bit, I think. So could you just explain what carnism is and how you define it?
Sure. And this is what my research actually led me to uncover, right? And so to uncover this concept of carnism, or the existence of carnism, I should say. So before I actually give you the definition of carnism, let me, for people listening who are thinking what is she talking about? Let me give an example of carnism in action. Okay. So let's just imagine that you're not vegan and you are biting into a juicy hamburger when your dining companion turns to you and says, that hamburger isn't made from beef. It's actually made from golden retrievers. Now, just take a minute to think about your experience, right? Chances are what you had just thought of as food, you now think of as a dead animal. So therefore, what you had just felt was delicious, you now feel is disgusting. And therefore, rather than continue to eat the hamburger, you probably want to throw it away in the trash and maybe even take to the streets in protest. So this is because you have not been conditioned to have a distorted perception when it comes to golden retrievers. So carnism is the invisible belief system that conditions us to eat certain animals. It's essentially the opposite of veganism. We tend to assume that only vegans or vegetarians follow a belief system, but the only reason we might eat pigs but not dogs, for example, is because we do have a belief system when it comes to eating animals. So when eating animals is not a necessity, which is true for anybody in the world pretty much who can make their food choices freely, who have the economic advantage to make their food choices freely, then it's a choice. And choices always stem from beliefs, but we don't recognize the belief driving our choice when we eat animals because the belief system, carnism, has been invisible. Carnism is essentially the opposite of veganism. And what carnism does, and this is what's, it's really important to understand about carnism, is two things. One is that it's not just any kind of belief system. Carnism is it's a dominant belief system. This means that it is so widespread that it's invisible. Its teachings, its beliefs, right, are woven through the very structure of society to shape norms, laws, beliefs, behaviors, and so on. So when we study nutrition, for example, we study carnistic nutrition. When we study medicine, we study carnistic medicine. We all learn to believe that eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary. And we don't question these beliefs. We don't question these myths. We just take them as facts. So carnism is a dominant system. It's also a violent or oppressive system. It is completely antithetical, in opposition to the core values that most people carry, that most of us share. Most of us would never willingly support intensive, extensive, and completely unnecessary violence and harm to animals. And yet most of us do support it multiple times a day. And we do it because we don't realize what we're doing. Systems like carnism that are organized around values and practices that are completely against what most of us believe in basically need to trick us into supporting them. The system needs to get people to support it who would normally not support it. And the way it does this, and I don't mean intentionally, it's just the way it's set up, is by distorting our perceptions. It uses a set of defense mechanisms. I call these, or psychological defense mechanisms, I call these carnistic defenses. These defenses distort our perceptions of meat, eggs, dairy, and farmed animals so that we eat animals, we act against our values without even realizing what we're doing. It basically teaches us how not to think and feel. And what happens is that for all of us, when we're born into this system that's so widespread and so entrenched, right? We absorb it. We absorb the system's logic as our own. We look at the world through the lens of carnism. We internalize these defenses, these ways of thinking, without realizing it, right? So if you're a vegan, for example, you've probably had the experience where all you have to do is say, I'm vegan, and whoop, the wall goes up. Don't tell me that you'll ruin my meal. Or you hear about all the ways you're wrong about your lifestyle and, your ideology from a person who never even heard of it before you mentioned it in this conversation. Like, it's like extraordinary what happens, right? And people are not acting defensively knowingly. They've just basically been brainwashed. They've inherited this mentality of carnism. Basically, carnism keeps itself alive by conditioning us to resist anyone or anything that would get us out of the carnistic box.
Yeah, I've heard you speak a few times over the air, Melanie, but I'm always blown away every time I hear you talk about carnism. It just makes so much sense, and it really helps sort of unpack some of these really entrenched systems that, most of us have grown up in. So thank you so much for walking us through the concept.
Well, thank you.
So relational and non-relational systems are also key concepts that we see coming up a lot in your work. I read Getting Relationships Right a few years ago when I was getting a relationship wrong, and it was actually incredibly eye-opening for me, and just really, really insightful book. So I'm hoping you can explain to us a little bit more about relational and non-relational systems.
Okay, so these words, like what I call, let's start with a non-relational system. It's another term to describe what people probably understand as an oppressive system, right? An oppressive system, sometimes called an unjust system. It just depends. It's, semantics. And these are systems like racism, patriarchy, classism, carnism, speciesism. For listeners who aren't familiar with what speciesism is, it's the belief system that teaches us to place species in a hierarchy of moral worth, like assigning more moral value to certain species, over others. And of course, we place humans at the top of the hierarchy, right? So carnism, you can think of as a sub-ideology or a subsystem of speciesism, just like anti-Semitism is a sub-ideology of racism, right? So these systems are often referred to as oppressive systems. I call them non-relational systems. I'm just using another word for them because in my work, what I came to realize over the years is that, when we look at some of the most pressing problems in our world today, right? Like these systems are obviously problematic, but even beyond them, right? War, poverty, of course, racism, patriarchy, animal exploitation, climate change, and problems in our lives, toxic workplaces, infighting environments within social movements, for instance, or, what we could call toxic, dysfunctional, or even abusive relationships. When we look at these really pressing problems in our world and in our lives, we can see that they share a common denominator. There are many common denominators, but one of them that's been overlooked is relational dysfunction, right? Or dysfunctional ways of relating to, between social groups, between humans and non-human animals, between humans and the environment, between individuals in families or in interpersonal relationships, and even between us and ourselves. We're always relating to ourselves through, for example, our self-talk, or the choices that we make that impact our future selves. And so basically, relational dysfunction is relating in a way that creates a sense of disconnection and insecurity. That's really when I define relational dysfunction, that's what I'm talking about. It also tends to lead to unjust power imbalances, right? So when we relate in a way that is, what I call non-relational or dysfunctional, the result is disconnection, unjust power imbalances, also a sense of insecurity or unsafety. And so when we look at these systems, we can see that we are conditioned to relate, in this case, we're talking about carnism, to relate to farmed animals in a way that reinforces this power imbalance, right? Humans having, like, basically wielding and abusing power over farmed animals. So it's really important to appreciate that, without getting into this like in too much detail, to appreciate that the experience of each set of victims of these systems will always be unique. And it's important not to compare the experience of victims. This can be very, very offensive to people, and we don't know what victims' experiences are. At the same time, the systems themselves are structurally similar. Most importantly is that the mentality that drives the violence of the system is the same. The very same mentality that drives us to cause harm to pigs and chickens and cows is the mentality that drives us apart from our family members who we might love and wish we could be closer to, is the mentality that drives wars, is the mentality that causes us to fight each other within our own social movements. This non-relational mentality is exactly the same. And so this is really important to appreciate, because a lot of time when we think about, creating a better world, we're looking at, we're thinking like, once we solve this big problem, we'll get it, right? Once we solve the problem of class, or race or gender, or whatever it may be, we'll have solved the world's problems. I mean, fortunately, people do think more nuanced these days, in a more nuanced way these days, but I think it's really, really important to not just look at who is oppressing or abusing whom. We need to look at how we and why we oppress and abuse in the first place, right? We need to learn how to think relationally, how to change the way that we relate. And it might be helpful for listeners, so that this is not an abstraction, to talk about what this looks like on a really practical level for them.
Yeah, you've talked about how some of the defense mechanisms, you mentioned it earlier. Is that the kind of thing you're talking about, the practical examples of how carnism protects itself?
Yes, so that's one way, one practical example that I think could be useful. So, when I was doing my doctoral research and I came to identify, carnism, I didn't just identify carnism, but I also really analyzed and deconstructed this system. Like, so what is it psychologically that's going on that keeps the system alive, that keeps it propped up? And that was what led me to identify these carnistic defense mechanisms, these psychological defense mechanisms. And so I'll give some examples of what these look like when it comes to carnism. And these ways of thinking, as well as other ways of thinking, which we can talk about as well, are part of this sort of non-relational mentality, ways of thinking non-relationally, right? So one example of a carnistic defense is objectification, right? We learn to think of farmed animals as objects. So we refer to the chicken on our plate as something rather than someone, right? And these are basically distancing mechanisms, right? They distance us from our natural empathy for in this case, farmed animals. Another thing that we do, another defense that we use, causes us to see farmed animals as abstractions, as lacking any individuality or any personality of their own. So we learn to believe, for example, that a pig is a pig and all pigs are the same. I mentioned earlier that we learned that carnism teaches us to believe in myths, right? So we learn the defense I'm referring to here is justification, right? We all need to be able to justify eating animals in order to continue eating animals for ourselves. And the way that we learn to justify eating animals is by learning to believe that the myths of eating animals are the facts of eating animals. And there's a vast mythology surrounding eating animals, but all of these myths fall under what I refer to as the 3 N's of justification, that eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary. And of course, these same arguments have been used to justify violent practices throughout human history, right? From male dominance to heterosexual supremacy. We don't even think, because these myths are embraced and maintained by all of our major institutions, nutrition and medicine, science, business, government, religion, the family. We just learned that eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary. We never question them. We never pause to think about about the fact that this is actually just a widely held set of opinions. These are not facts, but they're presented as facts. So these are some of the ways that we think that cause us to create disconnection, and insecurity, and often, unjust power imbalances. When we're relating to other humans, we think we use these same kinds of defense mechanisms when it comes to, supporting like racist ideology and practices, or, sexist or patriarchal ones, and so on.
It's so interesting. I've been thinking recently, you mentioned the word violence a few times. I recorded an episode of the podcast recently where we were talking about fatherhood and masculinity. And I was saying about how I've become much more conscious of violence on TV and in the media and things like that. And how desensitized I feel it's making me to violence. So then when you see really violent things in the news, it just goes over your head, and that's just something I've been thinking about a lot recently. And I guess this is playing into what you're talking about. This is another example of these systems kind of preserving themselves, right?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we get desensitized. These ways of thinking are distancing mechanisms, right? They distance us from our authentic experience, right? The reality of what's actually happening. And so we can become, like, there's one defense I talk about in my book, Why We Love Dogs, Eat Pigs, and Wear Cows, routinization, like what you see with like slaughterhouse workers, for example. You just do the same thing over and over and over again. And, many people will report that when they first start working in like meatpacking plants or slaughterhouses, or, in other jobs that require them to either harm animals or work with harmed animals, even sometimes in butcher shops, like they start out feeling extremely uncomfortable, with the process and with the work, the experience. And then over time, of course, just become increasingly desensitized to it. And it's very similar to what you're talking about.
There's a lot of really juicy topics here, and I know that our listeners are as captivated as Stu and I are right now. So if they want to learn more, if they want to keep digging into some of these really, really fascinating dissections of the way that our psychology works, where can they go? Tell us about Beyond Carnism and your mission and the resources you have available.
Sure. Thank you. So Beyond Carnism is it's my organization, or the organization that I founded, and I'm the president of. And our mission is to expose and transform carnism globally. And we do this by using a two-pronged strategic approach. We basically raise awareness of carnism among non-vegans as well as vegans. Once you become aware of carnism and the way it influences you, the way it affects the way that you think, it loses a lot of power over you. Once you recognize these biases and these distortions, that we've all inherited, you start to free yourself from them, free yourself to think more freely, more for yourself. So we raise awareness of carnism, and through books and videos, and this is for people who are non-vegan or also people who are vegan, who want to communicate about the issue more fully or understand the issue and how it impacts them. And we also support, we support people who are working to promote veganism and alternatives, right? So we have our Center for Effective Vegan Advocacy, and we have a lot of resources for anybody who's, really working on helping to end carnism in their own lives or in the world. So how do you take care of yourself? It's hard to be awake, when you do wake up to the fact that, we're living in carnism, which is essentially, a global atrocity, that can really take an emotional toll. And then when you start to try to become proactive in the solution to this problem, that can also take an emotional toll. It's challenging to be, vegan in a dominant animal eating world. And it can be very empowering as long as you have the tools and you know how to take care of yourself and you know how to take care of your relationships so that they don't suffer with this change as well. So many people find that it can be actually really healing for them once they start to do this work and go on this journey. So we have a lot of tools to support people to help them communicate about the issue, which can be really hard to talk about, to help people who are vegan or moving toward veganism to recognize the way carnism tries to pull us back I think especially for your listeners who are doing Veganuary, obviously are thinking, wow, I want to give this a try. And that's fantastic. I think, Veganuary is just such a great, great resource for people, and learning about the ways the world is set up to pull us all back into the carnistic cocoon of unknowing, right? And when we see those obstacles, we're less likely to be impacted by them. The way carnism teaches us to, think about ourselves when we stop eating animals and so on and so forth. So we have a lot of tools for people in every step of the journey.
And one of the biggest challenges that people talk about when they take part in Veganuary is dealing with friends and family. So we try to aid them in our 31-day email pledge with some, communication tools, how to deal with friends and family. Do you have some favourite communication hacks for when you're talking about veganism or plant-based diets?
Well, I mean, we do have communication hacks on our website, actually, one of our websites that we'll share with you guys. I will say just like a couple of things. One is that, and I'm so glad that you address this because it is a big issue. I have a book called Beyond Beliefs, which is a guide for vegans and non-vegans, navigating this difference. There's such a need for this. And many times, I've heard from so many people that becoming vegan was like one of the most empowering choices of their life. And then this sense of empowerment quickly turns to shock and horror when they learn that their communications and relationships start to break down. So, one thing is just to recognize that for many people who become vegan, this idea that oh my God, now the people in my life have to be vegan because I can't tolerate this relationship if they're not. And then we tend to try to get this other person to go vegan, watch Earthlings with me, do Veganuary with me, and often the harder we push, the more they resist. And this can create some pretty difficult experiences and deep divisions. So one thing I say is to first of all, remember that underneath our differences is a relationship between people. And when you're having a conversation about differences, that's where the focus needs to be, right? And many people who are vegan, newly vegan, or long-term vegans find that they don't actually need the other people in their lives to be fully vegan in order to have harmonious relationships. They need the other people to be what I call a vegan ally. And I recommend reaching out to the people in your life and instead of saying, please go vegan, say, I really would appreciate you learning about veganism, not to make you become vegan, but so you understand me. So you know what the world looks like through my eyes. So you know what's most important to me or what's deep in my heart. And so that we can feel more connected. So I'd love to share information with you so you can understand me. You find that when you have a vegan ally, and this is a person who's committed to understanding veganism and supporting you in your veganism, things can change dramatically. And you can also, instead of saying go vegan, and I think Veganuary is really good for this too, or asking people to go vegan, ask people to be as vegan as possible. Most people are much less defensive against that, right? And if we want to create a vegan world, we don't need everybody to become vegan to do that right away. We just need enough people to be vegan enough. People are much less defensive against the request that they just be as vegan as possible. We have a short video as well that might be helpful, and it's called What to Say to Vegans. And it's a video that we created for vegans who want the people in their lives to get it. To see the world through their eyes. And they can get that video at carnism.org.
And I think just understanding the concept of carnism is really helpful for negotiating in this kind of question, because it makes it less about the person that stood in front of you. You recognize that there is a system that is, having an effect on everyone. So I just think understanding that allows you to be less judgmental on a one-to-one basis. I did want to quickly just come back. One of the things I know that you say is a defense mechanism of carnism is to kind of invalidate veganism. And I just wondered if you could just speak on that briefly, because I think that's something that will be really helpful to people taking part in Veganuary to understand as well.
Yeah, sure. And it's very, very important. And I write about this in my book, Beyond Beliefs. So carnism uses two kinds of defenses. defenses, right? One kind of defenses basically exist to maintain carnism, right? And we learned that eating animals is normal, natural, and necessary, and the things that I talked about. These defenses exist to strengthen carnism, essentially. I call these primary defenses. The other defenses I call secondary defenses, and they exist to weaken veganism, essentially to invalidate veganism, right? So we learned that not eating animals is unnatural, abnormal, and unnecessary. And we also learn, one set of defenses are expressed through creating negative stereotypes about vegans. And this is a form of shoot the messenger, right? If we shoot the messenger, we don't have to take seriously the implications of their messages. And many vegans end up internalizing these negative stereotypes. They buy into them, they believe them, and then they feel ashamed. So for example, a common negative stereotype about vegans is that vegans are like overly emotional, right? They're too sensitive. They overly emotional, animal-loving sentimentalist, right? You're nodding, you've heard this before. Think about this. A person who's overly emotional, by definition, is not rational, and somebody who's not rational is not worth being listened to. When you think about like the global atrocity that's carnism, though, the emotions of sadness and horror and moral outrage are actually healthy, legitimate, appropriate emotional reactions to what's happening in the world. Much more concerning is the numbing and apathy of the dominant culture. And despite this, a lot of vegans can feel ashamed of their sensitivity and try to hide it or apologize for it or whatever. But when you look at this problem or the problems in our world, these problems are not because of too much sensitivity. The world needs more sensitivity and caring, not less. And of course, the same, negative stereotype has been used to silence the voices of other people who have tried to challenge oppression, like people who were fighting, African slavery in the United States. The abolitionists were called, sentimentalists, and the suffragettes who were advocating for women's right to vote were called, overly emotional and hysterical. So this is just one of many examples. And it's really important for vegans to recognize that this carnistic prejudice, essentially, is a way of silencing the voices of those who are challenging carnism so that they don't buy into them and, can, instead of feeling ashamed of our sensitivity, we can feel proud of it.
I'd like to take a bit of a pivot and talk about your latest book, A Half-Hearted Death Wish. So we're so curious, what made you want to turn your hand to writing fiction?
Well, thank you. I've always wanted to write fiction, actually. I was always creative before I became an academic. Like, that was really my family always expected me to be some sort of an artist. The plan was for me to become a professional musician, and that didn't happen. And then, well, maybe she'll be a novelist or, whatever, because that was where that's just how I'm wired, I think, to be creative is kind of like it always came naturally to me. It was always where I excelled in school. I ended up going into academia, which I really enjoyed, but I decided it was time to come back and, start working on music again. And I wanted to really do some creative writing, which I had always wanted to continue doing. And the timing was right. And I came to realize that there actually is a need for fiction. There's not a lot of fiction that is really exploring some of the fundamental issues that I think are important for me to that I really want to discuss. So this just seems like it was the right time. I could do it. And it was a great experience for me.
So can you sum up the book in a nutshell?
Yeah, so the book is about a psychologist who is in perfect mental health, who one day she wakes up to discover that her will to live has disappeared and it's been replaced by a burning desire to kill herself. So she's kind of like developed this what seems like it's a psychological flu of suicidality. And she doesn't know where this came from. And it goes on a journey of discovery to try to figure out the cause in order to find the cure, because she knows that if she kills herself, it's going to cause a lot of widespread harm in the people and animals who depend on the people and animals who depend on her.
So this maybe starts to hint at my next question. We are just curious if the novel touches on any of the concepts that we covered earlier on in our conversation. So you already mentioned animals. What elements of your other work might be infused into your fiction?
Well, the book is, I mean, because the main character is a psychologist, it incorporates a lot of psychology in it. And I have it touches on the themes that we've talked about, but it's broader than that. I mean, this book is it's really written for a mainstream audience, and it's a humor book, actually. It's funny. So it's a serious topic, and it deals with serious topics for sure. But it is a humorous book. It is written to be a funny book as well as a serious book.
And the central character is a psychologist. So is there a bit of an autobiographical kind of slant to this?
I think there's always some sort of an autobiographical slant to fiction books. So yeah, my family has read it and they're like, oh, my brother is like, oh, I found myself. So yeah, there are personal themes woven throughout, and there's a lot that's made up as well.
But it sounds quite absurdist and a bit trippy as well, would you say?
Yeah, the humor would be classified as absurdist. So as absurdist humor. So it's, it's not, people have asked me what genre it belongs in. And it is, some people, and I've asked readers actually, as well as ChatGPT. And so it's psychological suspense. So the therapist, the psychologist, she's kind of in this race against time because she's a psychologist. She knows that the unconscious has a way of fulfilling its wishes, and her unconscious is really driven to kill her, or to get her to kill herself. So, and she's, on this fairly intense journey to try to figure out what the hell is going on with her before she dies. And so there's a lot of psychological suspense and mystery, and the humor is, the fiction is slightly speculative and absurdist, meaning there are some sort of slightly, elements that you wouldn't find in reality.
Great. Just remind everyone what it's called.
It's called A Half-Hearted Death Wish.
And is it just available everywhere where you would buy books?
Yeah.
Great.
It is.
Amazing. I'm just finishing up my latest fiction now, but yours is next in the hopper, and I cannot wait to read it. I'm now more excited than ever. So,
oh, good. Well, thank you.
We like to return to food at the end, always, just where we started. So, a couple more foodie-related questions. What's your favorite place to eat out?
So I live in Berlin, Germany, and I live in the very edge of Berlin, actually. So I don't eat out that much, actually, here. And there's no favorite here. There are a lot of good places, but no favorite. I cook a lot. So my preference is actually to cook rather than eat out. That said, the last time I ate out and had an incredible meal was a few weeks ago at the AVA Summit, which you were at, Wendy, right? Yeah, I thought so. I thought I saw you. And we went to Crossroads in LA, and that was like, oh my God, that was pretty incredible.
I also went to Crossroads when I was in LA, and it was amazing. I had a pasta dish that was just, what did you order?
Well, we went with somebody, and she was like, you have to try everything. So she just bought this massive amount of food.
Those are the best friends.
Yeah, that worked out really well, actually. It was pretty incredible. And one of them was a pasta dish. She said they make their own pasta, so...
Well, I've never been to LA, but I have heard of Crossroads, so maybe one day I'll get to experience it. Do you have a food vice, a kind of indulgent treat that you can't resist?
I mean, so I thought about this. I don't know. I guess I give into a croissant once in a while. Just buttery tasting, fatty. I don't have a sweet tooth. I don't even eat sugar. But I do have a fat tooth. So that's really, really hard. There are certain foods I don't keep in the house because I know it's just not going to end well. So my husband's actually buying me one today because he just went somewhere and he's going to pass this place that has great vegan croissants. And I'm like, only one. He's probably going to come home with 10. Oh, but I know how much you love them.
I'm so with you on that. I live in a small town now with zero vegan croissants, but whenever I'm traveling, that's the first thing I look for in a new city. It's just one of life's great delights.
Totally.
So, Melanie, where can people follow you and stay up to date on your latest projects and learn more about your work?
They can go to carnism.org.
Perfect. Well, thank you very much for taking the time to do this. It's been lovely to chat to you, Melanie.
Yeah, you guys too. It's so easy to talk to you. I feel like I could just have kept going and going. So, but
If
it's
only
been
we had
great.
more than an hour. Sometimes an hour seems far too long. but today it's been great. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks so much.
I really enjoyed talking to Melanie Joy, Wendy. I found it like a very thought-provoking conversation, and I really like so much of the work that she does.
Yeah, she's brilliant. And when we had recorded the podcast, I think I said I hadn't yet read her book, but I since have ordered it and read it, and it was fantastic. So definitely highly recommend.
Brilliant. I'm going to ask you just a random question from my little box of questions here now. Is there anything that you're afraid to cook?
That's a great question. I'm a pretty adventurous person in the kitchen. I love to cook. I love to try new recipes. But I do tend to shy away from anything meringue. I made meringues, or not meringues. What do you call those French cookies? Macarons.
Yeah.
With aquafaba a few years ago. But I think maybe I was supposed to buy the unsalted chickpeas because they were awful. They had this like foot taste. It's like something has gone horribly wrong. So I want a pavlova. I see it happen on British Bake Off. I want to make that at home, but like I just feel like I'm not meant to be making aquafaba. What about you?
That's bringing back memories to me of when I tried to make meringue once, but I didn't have an electric whisk, and I was just trying to whisk it by hand, and it was absolutely awful. Do you know, I'm always afraid to cook of anything that's like needs to be deep fried. Like cooking a big pan of hot oil terrifies me. I don't know if this was a thing in the States, but when we were little at school, we'd have special lessons about what to do if you have a chip pan fire and you need to put it out. Because if you put water on it, it like sets fire to your whole kitchen. And that's really stuck with me. I just could never, I could never do anything with like lots of hot oil. I'm like terrified of it.
Mm. Well, in the US, we all have deep fryers in our houses, so we're all set there.
There you go.
No, I'm just kidding. But you're supposed to throw flour on it, right? Not water? Isn't that the trick?
Oh, here that it was a wet tea towel, a damp tea towel.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, I get it though. It is a messy business. Good thing you got that air fryer.
Yeah, you've got to get rid of the oil as well. What a pain.
All right. Well, Stu, if people want to contact us with their tips for putting out a grease fire or anything else, how can they get in touch?
They can email us at podcast@veganuary.com, and please use the subject chip pan fire. And you'll also find Veganuary on all the major social channels. We're on TikTok, Instagram, Facebook, anywhere that you're likely to be. We're probably there too.
And what if they're not yet signed up, but they want to get involved? How can they take part?
They can go to the Veganuary website, click the button that says try vegan and opt in, and you'll get 31 days of coaching emails. Don't worry if we're already a long way into January, or if you're listening to this at another time completely. It doesn't have to be January to take part in Veganuary. You can do it anytime and you choose your start date. And all you need to tell us is your name, your email address, and the country that you're living in.
All right. Well, yes, we would love to have you. Thanks for joining us today. This podcast was recorded at Distorted Podcast Studios and produced by Jim Moore at Bloody Vegans Productions. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and please rate us 5 stars. It helps other people find us and hear more about how to try vegan.
1, 2,